Right now on the Hollywood Reporter Roundtables.
I think some of the best moments on any film I've worked in is when the box seems small, and out of that sometimes come the best results.
That fear of, is this going to work?
Walking into the dark woods, not knowing if there's a way out the other side.
Right.
We'll hear from the writers and directors of some of the year's finest animated films. Steve Martino, the Peanuts movie, Pete Docter, Inside Out, Peter Sohn, The Good Dinosaur, Roger Allers, The Prophet, Richard Starzak, Shaun the Sheep movie, and Charlie Kaufman, Anomalisa. Welcome to the Hollywood Reporter Animation Roundtable. I'm Carolyn Jardina, contributing editor.
I'm Greg Kilday, film editor.
Thank you all for being here.
So let's get started. I'd like to throw this out to all of you. Animated films can take a long time, 3 years, 5 years. Do you ever find yourselves getting impatient with the process?
Yeah, every day. It requires a lot of stamina, I think. It's as much about tenacity as talent.
Yeah.
When you have that, when you want to move forward, but you know it's going to take more time, how do you pace yourself through a long production process?
Well, it's like running a marathon, really, and if you run too many sprints at the beginning, you'll be totally burnt out. You know, just trying to preserve a weekend now and again to stay fresh, keep perspective on what you're working on.
I think lunches are really good. Mm-hmm. I remember during Lion King, every lunch was like a working lunch for the first 2 years.
Yeah.
Which is nauseating. You know, I just think, an hour, come on guys, an hour, and you can just kind of let all those thoughts out of your head, and I think you'll come back way more refreshed. I think that kind of pacing would help.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever find yourself dreaming about the characters?
Yes.
You're spending so much time with them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I moved into a house at the start of production. As soon as I moved in, the farmer moved in sheep to the front of the house and the back. So I came home and there was bleating all night and then bleating all day. So that was tough. So even the weekends were a bit tough.
It really puts a lie to counting sheep, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
That's
never worked for me.
You ever had the experience where you wake up in the middle of the night thinking you've solved this solution, a brilliant solution, this is great, you write it down, you go to sleep all satisfied, and you wake up the next morning and it's absolutely awful.
Yes.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. I don't even know what I wrote.
I thought after completing a film that dreams would stop, but they just keep going too, and when does that stop? Someone tell me when that finishes.
Well, you're constantly rewriting your story as you go along, especially in the early years. At what point do you say, okay, it's ready for layout?
When the producers say, it's ready for layout.
Yeah. There's a lot of gates at Pixar in terms of getting through the story process and then getting the whole thing up onto reels. At Pixar, we have John Lasseter and the other directors that we call the brain trust that we go back and forth to kind of, give a good objective vibe where we're at that point. And so,
I mean, ideally, you want to go through those as quick as you can, but if they're false, like if you haven't actually solved the story problems and then you have to go backwards and undo stuff, that's a bad place, which is why we have all these. Does this really look right to you? Or are we insane for thinking this is ready to go? Which works out well.
I mean, Charlie, you're kind of new to the process. This is your first animated film, stop motion animation. Why did you decide to jump into this field with Anomalisa?
I didn't really decide. I had written this and directed this as a play. Dino Stamatopoulos, who's a friend of mine, was in the audience and he liked the play and he founded an animation studio and he asked me if they could make it into an animated film. So I said, sure, if you could raise the money, but I didn't expect it to happen. Once we started working on it, it seemed to lend itself to that, but it wasn't my choice.
Did you find yourself revising sequences once you knew they'd be done by animated characters rather than actors?
The play was a radio play. It was a staged radio play. So there was only dialogue and music and a Foley artist on stage. And so we had to design what the film looked like, what the characters looked like, all the action in the film. That was part of the process of making it into a film. In terms of the script, it's almost exactly the same. We adapted the play and then we did it. We made an animatic and we did it.
Essentially record and produce a soundtrack first?
Yes.
And all three actors at the same time?
Yeah, at the same time, in the same room, obviously. We recorded it almost like a play. It plays like a play because it was a play. And so that way we have them interacting and we kept everything that was on the recording, all the breathing, all the mouth noises and all that stuff. We didn't cut any of that. We animated those things. So
all one take or multiple takes at it?
We had a week of rehearsal after I wrote it. We performed it twice, in 2005 at Royce Hall at UCLA, and that was it. Then it was over, and wanted it to be over. It was this sort of thing that kind of went away that felt, I liked that it was ephemeral, and that the people who saw it and nobody else would, but now other people can see it.
You said that once you got started, the story seemed to lend itself to stop motion, was the words you used. What was it about the story that you feel worked for that?
I think that, the quality that we sort of went for and ended up with is a kind of a realistic, nuanced, but dreamlike and somewhat surreal world. And I think that having puppets moving in that sort of very subtle and nuanced way kind of ends up feeling like that.
Each person you speak to has had a childhood. Each has a body. Each body has aches. Look for what is special about each individual. Focus on that.
It's interesting that I've always dreamed of doing all the actors at once. In animation, the tradition handed down was like you get one actor in a gray room with one microphone, you do one line at a time, and then you assemble the whole audio track out of all these disparate. We recorded Tom Hanks and Tim Allen in different cities in different months, and they're having an argument together.
Is it a pragmatic reason?
Most of the time.
Yeah, because for people's schedules.
Yeah, ideally, well, we had 3 actors for 3 days, so it was easier for us probably. But ideally, they're actors, and that they feed off of the other performances.
We were able to get Amy Poehler and Phyllis Smith, who are our 2 leads on Inside Out, together for a lot of the big scenes where they played. And it was really, the energy level goes up, the listening, the little things that stammers and false starts and things that make it feel natural. It was a big help.
When you have a couple of actors, do you then go more into improvisation than you normally would?
Sometimes, yeah. Of course, most of the actors in our film came from that background, so they were able to just go. Oftentimes, Amy Poehler told us that what they'll do on her shows, which we tried to do as well, is like you hit the script until you know you have it, and then you just say, well, let's do, I think they call a fun run. Just goof around, play, do anything you want. It can go as long as you want. Tape is cheap, or whatever. It's not tape anymore. But.
Charlie was working for a set script, but for the rest of you, whether it's in the story process or the recording process, how much improvisation and change comes in?
Well, I know on The Prophet, with certain actors, they are more prone to improvisation, like John Rhys Davies. He had a small role, so he had more freedom in what he could do. But also Salma Hayek, who had a pivotal role, she did a lot of improvisation. She and I would like to play with scenes. If we do a scene and then she says, well, something about this doesn't feel right, then you go back in and you go, okay, well, let's try this. Because you're usually recording the scene just with one actor, often I put myself in the room and I'm the other actor.
Yeah.
Like I remember on Lion King, I was playing James Earl Jones in my head, to Matthew Broderick,
The reels that we make are a sort of template, so they're very amorphous. It's not like we have a script that's, super concrete when we start. So sometimes you are playing with certain characters that you're not really sure how they are formed yet, and so we have a lot of these scratch actors that we call them, so that we can kind of, hey, try this, try that, and then some other characters we just have a more formal, more lockdown thing that we do need from those characters.
And Steve, how different was it working with kids, young child actors for Peanuts?
Well, they were great, and some of the best takes in the movie were the little mess-ups or little improvisational things where I had Sally try to add numbers together, and she just started making up words. And that's the most charming material that you can put into the film. I also find that our storyboarding process, in a way, is an improvisational run. We start with the pages, and then the movie starts to take a life on. When we draw scenes, we get it into the story reels, and it begins to speak back. And sometimes those lines that look great in the script, you thought it was going to be really solid. Now you see characters moving and acting, and it begins to shift a little, and you then react to that. And then it's a process of kind of working with the material, reacting to the material. Yeah. So I see storyboard artists, I see our animators too as, improvisational actors in the physical, sense as well.
I think one of the misunderstandings of improv, I thought, this was that you'd get actors and say, all right, you're in a restaurant, go, do something funny. Like that, you get nothing. You need a structure. You need to know where your turns are happening, what you're building to. Once you have that, you can play around with the words. But words are just outward manifestations of the feelings you're trying to get across anyway, and the relationship turns, so.
On the bigger picture of how the story evolves over the course of production, in some cases you're cutting scenes, in some cases you're cutting characters. Like, for example, for Inside Out, you had said that for quite a while the discussed emotion was actually pride. So after you've been living with this character for a while, how hard is it to say goodbye to it and make that kind of change?
Well, I mean, there's all those things you find along the way that you sort of fall in love with, but ultimately it's always in surface of what's going to best tell your main character's story. And what, in the case of Pride, that character ended up saying a lot of the words that we actually wanted to give to Joy. So she was kind of stealing some of Joy's role in the movie. So, that can't go, she has to go. It really comes down to kind of what makes for the best through line, the bigger picture of what you're doing.
As a story artist, you come up with something and then you fall in love with it, but then, because of the story objectives, you lose it. If it's a great idea, it'll come back. If it's a great character, it will come back. And so you got to learn to let go of those things.
And Peter, you had a lot of changes in The Good Dinosaur. Could you talk a little bit about...
Yeah. What was interesting about that was Bob Peterson was the original director of The Good Dinosaur, and he pitched this idea of taking this boy and dog story and flipping it, where the boy is the dinosaur and the dog is this little human boy. And when he pitched that, everyone kind of got on board with that idea. And so I helped him develop that for several years. But then the story got very complicated. And then I got the chance to take over. And then in doing so, the first thing I wanted to do was just go back to that original heart of that boy and dog story. There were a lot of, of these babies that you have to let go, and it was really rough.
And you had been at Pixar for quite a long time already, but this was your first feature that you were directing.
Yeah.
How much pressure did you feel to live up to the
Boy.
Pixar?
Yeah, I was terrified, and what it was is that we didn't have a lot of time. This film was made in under 2 years, and so once I got on board, there was not a lot of time to kind of think about the fear or think about anything other than help raise this kid as best as you can. I can't tell you how, just through osmosis making this thing, how much of my fears have gone into the main character and into the journey of the film. And I just feel like, boy, whatever you're living is just going to get in there no matter what you do.
It's so common.
Yeah.
Pete is part of the brain trust that worked on all of these films, including Good Dinosaur. When you're working, especially with a first-time director, how do you give advice to be encouraging, not discouraging? What is the way you address them?
Well, I mean, people are honest, sometimes brutally so, but hopefully you make it about the project. And I think the other thing that really helps us, and is a little hard to understand, frankly, at the beginning, is that we're giving suggestions, we're giving notes, but they're not mandatory. Don't follow exactly what I say. What you have to do as a director is dig down and go, well, why are they suggesting this? What are they trying to fix? Okay, now that I understand that, I could fix that problem in my own way. I don't have to listen to what they're saying. But you have to unpack the suggestions and get down to the kind of bare roots of it before you can grow it back up. And I think that's something that takes a while, because as a fearful first director, you're like, okay, John Lasseter said, okay, I'll do exactly what he says. But that usually ends up producing not very good stuff if you just blindly follow what somebody's telling you to do.
Richard, I mean, how does the process work at Aardman? Because it too has established a great tradition, and you've got characters like Wallace and Gromit out there. Do you feel a pressure to measure up to that tradition?
Absolutely. Nick had won about 4 Oscars before I even got started making shorts, so that was quite terrifying. But we've got our own kind of mini Brains Trust. It's not as brainy as this Brains Trust. It's a kind of smaller kind of group. I kind of felt confident that Shaun was a popular enough character, and financially it was a relatively low budget film. It was going to make money. It felt like I was lucky in that sense. I think Pixar kind of feel that the financial pressure maybe a lot more. So I was in a sort of more comfortable place. But yeah, I kind of very blindly said, yes, I want to make a modern day silent movie. And everyone went, even my producer said, I think that's crazy, I don't think it's going to work. To be honest, I didn't think it was going to work either, but I kind of or didn't fully believe it was going to work. But that was the sort of fear that I kind of like. You need to put yourself out there a little bit. You need to push yourself, and I quite liked that fear of, is this going to work? You know.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the best moments on any film I've worked in is when the box seems small. In other words, it seems that we're going to limit ourselves to this and work within those constraints. And out of that sometimes come the best results. You know, I see people kind of rise to the occasion in a way that they wouldn't when, you know, you can do anything you want.
Sometimes artificial. I remember there was a Steve Martin book where he doesn't use the letter A in any of the words or something like that.
I always use the letter A.
Okay, good.
That's my constraint. I actually try to give myself free rein to sort of not know where it's going and allow it to go where it goes. So it's kind of sometimes a very scary process for me, but it's for sometimes very slow. I feel like when I'm starting on something and I have the germ of an idea, I can't possibly know what the largeness of the idea is. So I'm going to start not knowing and sort of see where it goes. I like working that way, but it does feel like a tightrope thing, and it does feel like, you know, like failure is imminent always.
Because there's all those books that you read, know exactly your structure, know where you're headed.
I totally disagree with that. How can you do that? To me, the whole thing is a process of discovery.
Yeah.
And all these people who say, oh, you have to know your theme even before you get
Yeah.
I can't work that way.
Discover it as you go.
For me, it's always sort of just this intuitive kind of, oh, I'm drawn to this, and then there's something that comes in here, and these two things seem to magnetically go together, and you just watch these things come together, and of course some things fall off. But
I've worked on things for a year before I understood. Oh, and then I go back and fix everything that came before those pages. But you know, and I always think, what if I just sort of forced myself to finish this thing 6 months ago? Which is, because that's always in my head, you know, like, okay, if I wouldn't have come to this thing, you know, that required me to be sort of out on a ledge worried for a long time.
Yeah. Realizing that world often comes through working with a lot of other artists, and it's not quite as singular an endeavor.
Well, I mean, in terms of writing, it's singular, but in terms of the making of the movies, it's never singular. I mean, there are so many different people, and obviously on this movie I had a fellow director, but you know, the production designer and the cinematographer and the animators. I mean, they're all these incredibly creative individuals who bring so much to it. The actors, you always find more when you involve more people. I mean, people that you respect.
And then even the people that are running the studio are all filmmakers at the same time, and it sounds like it is a great support system that, like, for a first-time director, that, like, whether I have some successes or if I fail and make a huge mistake, that the other directors are there, like, I've been down this journey before. And
I think there's probably unique challenges to it as well, that maybe, you know, some filmmakers might look at the opportunity to call your own shots a little bit more and with a certain amount of envy, but you know, there's obviously advantages as well.
Roger, having worked at Disney, what it's like to be more out on your own as you are now?
Well, it is definitely, you know, flying without a net. You know, the support that you have in those big studios, you know, Pixar, Blue Sky, everybody, you know, there's a lot of support, and there's a lot of people to lift and move this whole thing forward. Working on this project, on The Prophet, was tiny. It was really tiny. I mean, I was mostly in a little office in Santa Monica. It was like 2 rooms with like 4 people in it. And, you know, there's no assistant, there's no nothing. And so what winds up happening is you're doing not just one job, but you're doing like 3 jobs. Everybody was doing like 3 jobs.
You said you had
It's huge.
multiple studios around the world. Were you Skyping, kind of checking
That's
in?
it. Most of this movie was directed over Skype for me. So like,
That's
you know, I have a
incredible.
little room, but I have a great big screen. You know, and so this is what I'm doing with people, you know, in Paris and in Dubai, and you know, it's such a new world. You know, it enables you to work with all these people. At the same time, it's like there's nothing like being around.
Yeah.
In the room, you know, us around this table, there's a certain, I hate to use the word magnetism again, but there's a certain energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a creative energy that's there. It's wonderful that we get connected through a screen, but I do miss, there's a little something tangible that's not there, I find. But yet at the same time, it enabled me to work with, you know, Michal Sohn in Warsaw, you know, and I couldn't be hopping on a plane running all over the world all the time.
So let's elaborate on your process a little bit, because you know, The Prophet is based on a series of poems, and each poem has a very different look and style, because you worked with different animators, and then you have this framing device to pull it all together. But talk a little bit about, in addition to working with these different animators, how did you bring the story all together?
Well, yeah, that was, I mean, I loved the book, and so I jumped at the chance to do this, but I had no idea how I was going to do it. There's almost no story in the book. The story is so simple. It's just this guy has been somewhere he can't leave, and he sees a boat, and that day he knows he can, and he goes and he talks to some people on the way, and he gets on the boat and he goes. So that was basically it. So I wanted to preserve that, but open it up.
These things move within you as lights and shadows in constant half embrace. You'll be free indeed, not when your days are without a care, nor your nights without grief, but rather when these things bind up your life, and yet you rise above them, unbound.
I had to choose which poems could fit in a storyline and feel like they grew out organically, and tie these disparate things together. I knew each of these poems were going to go out and be these sort of dreams, like dreams, and that we'd have to come back to Earth. It was all very unpredictable, you know. So the intention was to make it for a broad audience, for like children and all to follow too. So I had to balance the tone of make it entertaining and have some light humor, but then somehow we're going to get to go into these poems. Yeah, that was, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but you just sort of keep using,
Keep on chugging.
keep on chugging.
Well, I'm curious, Steve, I mean, you're working with a poem, an unconventional source.
Yeah.
I mean, you're working with years worth of comic strips, but they're often 4 panels with no story. How hard was that?
Well, I think it was great in the fact that there's wonderful resource. You know, we looked at the way Charles Schulz drew these characters, and they provide so much guidance in terms of emotion. I mean, I studied those drawings when I was a young animator. Taking it into a feature form, what was important and what we tried to do was look at the broader context. In a way, we looked at Charlie Brown through 50 years and said, what is it about him and the qualities that he has that we can lift up and put at the heart of this movie in terms of kind of a thematic spine for the film? Finding that thematic heart of the story then allows you to filter through and say, well, this little moment that's funny actually helps support the drive of that. And other things you will just leave out because they're not propelling the story.
How much did you kind of debate whether you needed a strong through line or quest, or whether it could be a much more anecdotal movie?
Well, you know, the thing I loved about working on this film, because I've worked on others where, you know, what drives the action is some, you know, big event. You know, I don't know, aliens are going to come down and, you know, steal the planet, or, you know, that they're real life and death stakes that you understand in life and death way. But what I love about what Charles Schulz had done, and we feel this when we're in that moment, like you're a kid and you're wondering whether, you know, somebody likes you, it feels like life and death. And be able to take the simple and give it that same sense of stakes, you know, felt so refreshing to me, you know, that I didn't have to bring a villain into the story. You know, the villain is our day-to-day struggles, you know, that we have, you know, each individually. And just kind of magnified, and that's what Charlie Brown's always been. You know, he's been a magnified version of failure and trying again.
It's not often you get the opportunity to start over with a clean slate. This time, things will be different.
We did so much of our storyboarding work right in the office where Charles Schultz drew the comic strip. To work with Craig Schultz, the son of Charles Schultz, and his son Brian, kept us close to the source material. Literally those drawings up on the wall looking down on us as we were storyboarding, you know, feeling like I'm not getting these characters drawn well. But there was something about being in the room together that allowed us to push one another. We want to create a film that meets an audience today and meets a new generation, but doesn't recreate these characters, doesn't retell the tone or you know, the heart of what these, you know, Charlie Brown comic strips have always been. And I think it was being in the room together that allowed us to kind of find that path.
Did the family give you any sort of personal insight to some of his own, like, homely, you know, home struggles or things in his own personal life that led him into solutions which wouldn't necessarily show up in the movie but might really help you feel the creator a little bit?
That was instrumental.
Yeah.
The time we spent with Jeannie Schultz at the Schultz Museum, and they share so much of his life. And Craig Schultz would, you know, every day we would have lunch together at the Warm Puppy where Charles Schultz had lunch every day. And he'd say, oh yeah, I remember when I was riding dirt bikes and my dad did this and then Pigpen did this in the comic strip. You know, so you can't help but when you spend time with people, you know, when you're eating lunch and just hanging out, you become friends and you become a little bit more, I guess, part of their world. And it was instrumental. It really was helpful to me.
It's a very strange name for a restaurant.
The Warm Puppy?
Yeah. Is that what they served? Or what's this?
Sounds like a restaurant.
It's a Korean
in
restaurant.
an Arvin.
I know.
Coming from different directions, do you find, is it harder working with the constraints of an existing character or property or creating something totally new and individual?
In retrospect, it's probably more difficult because you've already got a structure there and you're trying to attach something to it, you're trying to make it bigger, and you kind of want to start from zero. You wish you didn't have those constraints, and so it was actually quite difficult. But the fun was actually digging deeper into the characters, because in a TV series and in short episodes, you don't get to know them very well, but to dig deeper into their character and make them bigger on screen than they are on TV was a thrill, really.
Richard, with that film, Shaun was introduced in Nick Park's short, A Close Shave, which was 1995, and then you've been involved in the TV series since 2008. What prompted everyone to say at this point in time, it's time to do a feature?
Me badgering them, really. I kind of, even in the first series, I saw that there was scope to tell longer stories because it kind of punched above its weight. It was a kids' show, but it had a very broad appeal to adults through to children and internationally as well.
It's seen in 170 territories now.
Yes, yeah. The power of silent comedy. In England or in the UK, we tend to think if you've got a children's series and you make a film, the film kind of is the death knell of the series. You know, you kind of make the film when...
Squeeze the left.
It's just one more. And I didn't want to think like that. I thought it was a very cynical way of thinking. I thought, Shaun had a lot of potential. So, luckily, we're making a second film and more series, so that's good.
Did anybody ever question, because I got this a lot, Peanuts always lived in a shorter form.
Yeah.
22 minutes, certainly in the comic strip, but in terms of that expansion to feature length, where there are naysayers, where there are those who say, well, can you, create a story that has that kind of drive?
Yeah, there were quite a few people within the company, and as we sounded companies out to finance the film, would say, no, a silent film won't work, not in this day and age. Mm-hmm. The Artist had just come out, by the way, but that wasn't good enough.
Have you gone back to them?
Yes.
Films come out?
No, I should do it. Yeah. There was, and I personally, I was worried that I know children, they've got limited concentration time. So if the film doesn't engage them all the way through, and I wondered whether having no dialogue would actually tire them out, because you have to concentrate a lot harder. I think you have to watch the screen a lot more intently. So anecdotally, the kids went less to the bathroom than they usually do in films, which was quite good.
I think dialogue can tire them out, quite frankly.
I wonder, with all your films, do you find yourself paring back on dialogue because you're able to do so much visually?
I mean, for us, it's definitely a process. You start with more, and whenever you can, you cut back. And we were talking earlier that, we even have developed this kind of run-through, which imagine there is no dialogue. Are we, just through the acting, through the camera, through the staging, are we communicating the point of the thing?
You overwrite, because when you have a script page, I'll make certain that this point is getting across,
Right.
and so it's there in every bit of dialogue. And then when you start to bring the characters to life, you realize, well, that's totally communicated in the action that's there on the screen, and you can pull lines back, and less is more. I love just the pure pantomime. Having worked with Scrat and now working with Snoopy and Woodstock, that's the most fun.
Yeah, Scrat was a big influence on me.
But that's like the beginning of all the DNA of like animation lovers and nerds out there. Like you just start with the flip book.
Yep.
Yeah.
You start with that magic of having drawings come to life with nothing. And
Chaplin and
and
Mr.
so it's just like in
Keaton.
the DNA of anyone that's made animation. It's just that you're used to trying to tell stories visually through gestures and all that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
And Charlie, in your case, I mean, you must have discovered things in the movie that didn't exist in the radio play.
Yeah.
Simply because, you couldn't watch the characters.
Every visual joke in the movie was invented for the movie, except visual jokes that are referenced in dialogue. So we added probably a good 20 minutes to the film from just the dense dialogue that was in the play. I like dialogue. I mean, I'm a writer, so I guess I like it. I'm fond of it, but I also think that there's something cool about taking these things which are obviously not real and grounding them with very realistic performances by actors. I really like that. It cements something in, and it's probably not for everything, but for what we were trying to do and for the type of world we were trying to create, it sort of seemed to serve us.
Did you go back and forth about how detailed to make the characters, or whether to keep them kind of stripped down a bit the way you ultimately do?
Well, I mean, they're pretty specific characters. The design is pretty specific. Lisa and Michael are based on real people. Tom's characters, which is the same face, is an amalgamation of a lot of people that we put together in Photoshop so we could get something that was kind of androgynous, so it could be a female or a male or a child. They look like the people that they're designed to look like. So, we wanted them to feel real and specific, I guess, as opposed to the rest of the world.
I'm curious about ratings. In your case, your movies are rated.
Yeah.
Was there any back and forth with the ratings board that it might veer into an NC-17?
Nope. No, we submitted it. They said R. We said thank you.
Okay, because I certainly thought there were moments in the bedroom scene that if it had been done with live actors, those kind of things have gotten NC-17s in the past.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think we weren't sure when we went in. I mean, I think I know what you're referring to. But
I think that the rating boards, it's the too many thrusts rule is one of the rules.
Oh, that wasn't what I was thinking.
Well, there's another moment as well.
Yeah, I don't know the rules, and I understand that sometimes I shouldn't say this. They're not always sort of hard and fast. There's a question. You don't really know what you're going to get. But they came back, and we have a lot of cursing in the movie, and we have the sex, and so we could have made it more graphic than we did, I guess.
How about for the rest of it? I mean, you may be working with PG or PG-13s, but are there ever discussions about crossing the line between a PG or a PG-13?
yeah, our film, the facade of it is about two young kids, a young dinosaur with this like 6-year-old boy, kind of animal surviving out there. But in trying to make those threats real, there are some intense moments in the film where, nature does its duty in terms of becoming an obstacle that can really scare a young kid. And so there were discussions about trying to find the balance of honoring what this film was about. It is about a kid, understanding what his fears are and trying to get through it. So how much do you pull back on these things so that you don't want to water down what the characters are going through. But yeah, there was some discussion about that.
Well, we were a G rated. And, well, you start with the tone of what Peanuts has been. And as I started the project, I really wanted to make a film that parents, grandparents, and kids could, the entire family could go see. You know, you never get into the storytelling going, oh, well, this is going to put us in this place or that.
Right.
By adhering to a certain tone, it lands in G territory, which I'm really happy about, because Peanuts has always been that thing, well, this is safe. You know, this is going to be fine for my kids. Along the way, it was never a discussion of, oh, we should try to bump this up to PG, so that we can get the teen audience or anything like that. It was, let it be what it's supposed to be. It's kind of like your film, it's pure and it's right for that story.
Yeah.
Our film was less about violence or inappropriate, but more just complexity. The whole thing takes place inside the human mind, and so there's a great deal of sophisticated concepts that are thrown in there, and there was a lot of worry early on that kids wouldn't get it. The nice thing is, I think the audiences have shown us that they not only get it, but they've been affected by it. We had one story, this kid who was taking swimming lessons, afraid to dive off the diving board, and after seeing the film was able to jump because he said, I felt like fear had been driving, and I asked fear to step aside. So it was just like, wow, this is a whole, and I've had parents of autistic children tell me that for the first time they're able to speak with their kids about emotions, which they've never been able to do. And I wish I could take credit for that. That's sort of a cool, really cool byproduct of the film. But I think it shows that kids are way more intelligent than we oftentimes give them credit for.
You'll throw in a Salvador Dali reference, which a kid isn't going to get, but do you consciously kind of connect that with maybe a bit of slapstick so that at any given moment there's something for the kids and something for the older audience?
Yeah, like we have this moment where Joy accidentally knocks over two boxes. One says facts and then the other one spills a bunch of opinions. And she's like, oh no, they look too similar. And Bing Bong says, don't worry, it happens all the time. He just shoves them in one box. And that's a joke that the adults laugh at. But I was with my producer who has a 3-year-old, and his son laughed at it. And I'm like, wow, it's pretty sophisticated. He actually laughed because it spilled. Not because he got the sophistication of the joke, but anyway. But you try to definitely layer it.
Do you find, working on the film for 3 years, you want to have some fun with it yourself.
Yeah, totally.
And so, you can't help but, have some things in there that are going to make you laugh, maybe fly over the head of a younger audience, but, we're moviegoers too.
Yeah, I just found that always, in my whole history, like whatever that was, 17 years with Disney, we never thought about really anybody else, quite honestly. We just wanted to amuse ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
That was really the main goal, was making ourselves amused or feel something. If we felt like we were being affected that way, we thought, well, then maybe everybody else will be too. But the whole idea of, well, what does the audience want, or what do the kids want?
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't know another person's mind. All of us around this table would make a movie differently.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so, I always liked that about
Particularly
the whole
with
process.
comedy, are you doing audience testing to see how the comedy or the jokes play?
We did at work just showing each other. But that's
the
it.
best.
We did one friends and family screening, so that was very helpful. But we didn't do any kind of formal testing or anything.
I kind of enjoyed that. We did a bit of that, not very much. I think we had 2 screenings in big cinemas with about 600 audience. We filmed the audience just to watch them, how they responded, where they got bored, where they laughed, just to as a kind of refresher, because there are a lot of jokes in the film, and if one's not playing well, we maybe go back and try and re-edit it, because you get so bored with your own jokes, you can't work out.
Did you end up making changes as a result?
Little edits, nothing more, and the occasional addition of a close-up for a reaction shot, which is usually quite good to get a laugh. So.
Richard, did you have any tools with that? Like the idea of seeing a joke over and over again? Did you have, what were some of the ways that you stayed objective?
It's been a long-running thing. As you probably experienced yourself, you kind of, you're aware that you start to change things because you get bored with them.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
And you have to keep reminding yourself that it was very, very funny.
At one time.
I really, really laughed at that.
Years ago. One time, years ago, it was really funny.
There's a kind of grey area where you go, I think I've got a better idea, but maybe we could do it this way, and we have to have agreement. I had to have agreement with my co-director on the story. But is this funnier? You know, because if they go, no, it's just a different joke.
Yes, exactly. It's a side joke.
It's
is what we
tricky
call
too
them.
because sometimes the story changes around it,
Yeah.
and it genuinely isn't funny anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And how do you
Yeah.
parse out the
That's
difference
true.
between that and just being numbed?
Right.
What is it like to bring out an independently made animated movie when you're competing with these guys who have big studios and big marketing machines behind them?
Yeah, well, I can't think of it as being competing. I'm just hoping people see it. You know, really, it's an eye opener when you do a little independent film and there's no budget for advertising. There's no advertising. There's no anything. The most that gets your movie people aware of it is interviews you get to do and whoever might write about it. And you know, everybody would love their movie to be successful. I would just love it to be seen. Please. No, you know, it can get really pathetic, but
Well,
it's true. I mean, after having worked at Disney and Sony, where there's this enormous machine in place that they know what they're doing, and boom, it's all of a sudden bingo, it's on the sides of buses and it's up on billboards and playing on television and everywhere. And,
I mean, you
go,
did have one secret.
that was nice. What?
You did have one secret weapon in Selma Hayek, and wanted to
She
talk
is
about
a
her
force of
involvement.
nature, and she whirls around the world, and yeah, she's great in that way for sure.
And
And
she
she
was
was that
clearly-
way during the production as well. You know, drawing people into the project. You know, she knew Gabrielle Yared and you know some of the musicians. I mean, she would ask Damien Rice, "Damien, can you write me a song?" You know, and he said, "Sure. You know, maybe I'll have some time next week." And she go, "God, I could really use one tomorrow." You know, things like that. So you know, that was actually another interesting thing. Is just people did it kind of. For friendship and for love, you know, either for love of the book,
That's great.
or out of friendship to you know.
Seems like there's usually like a connector person. For us, Bill Hader was the first guy we cast, and he connected us to a lot of other actors and writers, and you know that otherwise we might not have gone to. So pretty cool.
How deeply do you get involved in the marketing of your movies? Somebody made the decision to hold back Bing Bong. Was that you?
From promotion?
I think that was mutually agreed upon. Yeah, from promotion, we like from a storyteller standpoint, I have to sort of hold on because they want to give everything away. The basic philosophy is we have to show people that we got the goods. So give away all the good stuff. And I, as a film goer, I kind of like, I want to be surprised. I want to know. I don't want to know what's going on.
It's a balance because there's some trailers that give you right tease, but then there are trailers that you just shown me everything.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
And you feel like I don't need to see it.
yeah, I don't need to see it
Luckily, in
anymore.
this case, Bing Bong alone, I think out of context could look like this movie is for babies, you know. And of course, in the context of the film, he sort of represents a completely different thing. So it was decided, I think, mutually to hold him back.
And I know Charlie's movie, that first piece of still art you put out was almost intentionally mysterious. We just saw the back of the head without knowing much more.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to, you know, we made this movie completely under the radar, and there wasn't really any interest in it externally, but we wanted to release an image that didn't give away, you know, what the movie was. And we're still trying to do that as much as we can. I mean, when we first went out with it, there's some conceits in the movie that I won't talk about that we didn't want to be revealed. But as soon as we went to our first film festival, the reviewers mentioned everything in the movie. So we gave up on that. I mean, I still won't talk about it here, even though I might as well.
No, don't.
No, I won't. But, you know, with the trailer, which we just released, it does sort of avoid a lot of the things in the movie that we want people to be surprised about. And so, consequently, the trailer feels sort of, I think the trailer's really good. I like the trailer, but it feels sort of separate in some ways from the experience of the movie. But there was really no other, that we could think of, no other solution without just sort of spilling the movie, which, what's the good of that? So.
Do you folks read reviews? Because I often find they give away too much.
Oh my God. Do I look? Do I not? You know.
And what did you ultimately decide?
I don't go digging People mention things to me or will send an email. Did you see this? I don't mind getting a few of the good things now and again, but I certainly haven't gone mining for that.
Yeah, especially when they basically the review is the telling of the story, including the emotional punchline.
That's just lazy reviewing in my book, but yeah.
Pete, what did you learn about yourself when you made Inside Out?
Well, it was a really giving subject matter. The attraction, frankly, for me was the comedy of emotions as characters. That just seemed like, oh, this is animation friendly. It's going to be like Bugs Bunny, these louder than life kind of characters. But as we got into it, we realized, gee, this is a subject that is probably key to the most important thing in our lives, and that is how we remain in relationship with other people. And the emotions are completely invisible to us in day-to-day life. We don't think about, gee, I think I should get mad now, or I should be fearful or whatever. That just sort of happens to you. So even creating scenes, like, okay, how do I want a funny line from anger. What would motivate that? What would cause anger to be angry in this scene? And so you have to kind of back up and really almost think like a psychologist or something as we would be writing. So it was very, like I say, a very giving concept to work on.
Did you use anything that you approach your children or your friends differently with after having
Yeah, well,
the
I mean, the film was kind of sparked by watching my daughter grow up. I remember she was about 11, and she came home from school. I think she was upset about her best friend from kindergarten wasn't talking to her. And I sort of did the typical dad thing and made like a goofy face trying to, because that always usually got her to laugh. But she was 11, and she kind of looked at me and just turned away. And my heart just I felt so awful because I remember what that's like. I know from experience, growing up is really hard, and she's coming into that awareness of being judged and what does it take to fit in socially and all that kind of thing. Like finding your tribe, and that's the age where the tribe you're given, the one you grow up in, now kicks you out and you have to go find your new tribe and earn this one. And that's when all those emotions come into play.
Sorry. Okay. Bye.
Both me and my co-director, we were writing a father-son story, so we did have a heart-to-heart after a few beers one night about our relationships with our own father and found a lot of similarities. We both had problematic relationships in the same way, and that became inherent in the story. And I'd like to say it was cathartic. It was actually rather difficult, to make that work for you, so it's still a comedy, but you're kind of trying to say something as well.
I find it
I think
fascinating.
we should all join hands now.
I find it fascinating how your life in the making of the movie gets so intertwined with the work that you're creating. I was watching my daughter get ready to go to college. That process for the first time of really putting yourself out there in competition against everybody else. What are your test scores? Where do you line up? And her and all of her friends kind of judging their worth in some degree based on that. And it just struck me, like in our story, that what's important to remember is the little things. It's being kind. It's, how you treat your friends. It's when somebody's down, how do you interact with them? And at this age, when you're kind of high school going into college, you put so much of your self-worth into these other things. I just found in Charlie Brown's story this perfect, oh my gosh, this totally is intersecting what's going on in my life.
Peter, what have you taken away from it, do you think?
It's interesting because I didn't necessarily connect to in the beginning. The original idea of this is taking a dinosaur family and starting on a farm. I grew up in New York City, and so I'd never been on a farm. Going out to the farm, I completely connected to my family had a grocery store, and as a family unit, we're working very hard to survive in a city. These farmers and ranchers would be that same unit of a family, but just surviving out in the wilderness and the frontier. These parents raised these kids in a way that was so moving to me because as a parent myself with 2 kids, I'm a helicopter parent. I had no idea how much I was, where I was just coddling everything and just like, no, let me do that. Where this father, in that kind of old frontier way, was just like, I'm gonna show you this once, and that's it. And he taught these kids in that way, and trying to capture that life in the film and trying to leave room for that in those learnings was very moving for me. But yeah.
And I would imagine with The Prophet, there's lots to feast on in those words.
It is. You know, I got the book when I was in college, and it had a very profound effect on me. I mean, really profound. I mean, while reading it, I had kind of a consciousness shift thing go on, and I'll always remember that. So when I got the opportunity out of the blue to do this, I really was excited to do it. While trying to expand the story, I'm going to start sounding kind of woo-woo here, but I always kind of like also just sort of invited Gibran's spirit in there, you know, because I was going to take a lot of liberties with this. I was going to expand it. So I felt a little bit in kind of communion with the spirit in a way. This for me was like a kind of the end of a big circle from college time when I was so affected by this, to have the opportunity at this point in my life to try to put something out there that I felt like as a positive thing. Something that also would be a reflection of a positive aspect of something that also grew out of the Middle East. There's nothing good coming out of there right now. We're not hearing anything good. And yet there are things of beauty from that culture as well. We took it to Lebanon, and there was a premiere for it in Beirut, which was the first time they ever had a movie premiere there, which was amazing to me.
Wow. Really, the first time?
The first time. And then Salma shows up and is the first, you know, walk, you know, and all that sort of thing. It was very exciting. And then they all went crazy. Gibran is like a cultural hero for them, so it was very exciting. And again, also, that city, you know, which had been torn apart, it's intense right now. And so it was good to have something that was a positive thing, and we could celebrate getting beyond all these divisions of religions and everything, you know. So I don't know if that says something like I learned from it, but it was a really profound experience.
Talking to all of you at this table, I mean, there's a whole range of animation here. I wonder, I mean, last year, a lot of people were celebrating Lego. The Lego movie is a really interesting, groundbreaking movie, and yet it didn't get an Oscar nomination. Were you surprised? Do people have conventional expectations for animated movies that they have to be disabused of?
I thought it was so inventive and wildly funny.
I think that's the exciting potential. I mean, the films that you're working on and the things that I'm starting to see happen. If we continue making the same kind of films in style that we have, we're just going to kind of drive ourselves right off the cliff. I think, you know, there's such opportunity to find different ways to move characters, to create stylistic, you know, looks. It was one of the things that I was most excited about in this goofy way of moving Peanuts characters around, is that it just was different than
really different.
The physical realities that we were striving for in previous films.
Totally different look, God, for your studio.
Yeah, I just hope there's more of it. I think, you know, that's where we can stretch ourselves.
I think there has to be. Just in this world, you know, where, you know, with the internet and everything, with things coming from everywhere, and you get to see people working on things. I love that, you know. Someone will show, I'll show you a few of my scenes, and they put it out there. And all these different approaches.
Yeah, because the only way you could find like the Canadian like film board films when I was a kid, it was like impossible to see. You'd have to go to
festivals.
Exactly, and then now it's like on Vimeo and all these, and everyone's just putting it on there. And so every once in a while, you're like an evening, you're just like, I feel like I'm back in, you know, film school, just because the amount of it is incredible.
Do you think Charlie's film will be viewed as a one-off, or is there a developing market for animated movies that may take on adult subject matter?
I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah,
I think if the movie does well, then it won't be a one-off.
It'd be great to see a Charlie Kaufman Lego film, I think. I don't know what that would look like at all.
Well, they want to make various...
Not going to find out.
No.
They want to do various sequels, so this is probably an opportunity.
How do you all feel about sequels? Would you like to stay with your characters some more and do another?
You know, you design these characters with specific arcs and change. And so you've done all this setup work, you've ticked along, and they've paid off. So now they are complete. And now you're picking up from here, and you're having to drag all this baggage around and hopefully find something that you didn't even know that you had set up for a further change. It's very difficult. I know for me, the real fun of it is always walking into the dark woods, not knowing if there's a way out the other side.
Right.
And so I'm looking forward to doing that again.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to come to the end of our time together, but I'd like to throw out a bit of a oddball question, but something that I hope you could have some fun with. You all are intimately familiar with the history of animation. I wonder, is there one animated character, one classic animated character that you'd like to be for a week?
Oh, man, what just came right into my gut, we talked about gut feelings earlier today, Dopey just shot right into my head. When I was a kid, I just loved Dopey.
Cool.
Why Dopey?
He was just so fun-loving. You know, he was the embodiment of a child and seemed to just enjoy life.
He was so direct. He was so direct.
I
There was
know.
no filters with him.
Exactly.
He just expressed everything he was feeling in the moment.
Yeah.
Really pure.
And it
Very
really had
pure
an
character.
impact on me when I was a kid. It was probably one of the earliest characters that really kind of shot into my brain.
What's shot into mine was Bugs Bunny. Because I always had that desire to have those quick-witted, outthink everybody. It never happens.
And being bulletproof as well. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
For me, it was Porco Rosso. Do you remember that music?
yeah.
Because he's like a fat pig guy and he's free, and I wouldn't mind being him just flying and being free and kind of feeling out the world. And
I don't know. What came to my mind immediately was Captain Hook. But it's because he's my favorite character. And I don't know. Yeah,
Psychologists would have a field day.
I know. Well, I think I'd love to be a villain. Yeah. You know, I'm always Mr. Do-Good. I'm always doing all these things. You know, I have to explore the dark side. And also, he's just so big and funny. I think that was the other thing. It was just the idea of playing Captain Hook would be really fun. You know, just doing something broad and funny. I love funny villains. You know, so. And I'm obsessed with crocodiles too. I don't know why. It all comes back.
What's that ticking noise I hear?
Right.
I don't know, Popeye?
Wow.
I don't know why. I mean, I don't know. I like that animation. I like the Fleischer Popeye, not the King's feature or whatever that was.
Of course.
You like walking around muttering to yourself?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah, I just like the way it looks and feels. And I had a crush on Olive, and so
How's spinach work for you?
I like spinach. I don't like canned spinach, but I like spinach.
Yeah.
I'm afraid mine was Bugs Bunny as well because it was just that kind of bomb-proof character that I really enjoy, and also I once went to an animation festival to a roundtable discussion like this. Is Bugs Bunny gay? Which I thought was a very interesting half hour.
What was the conclusion?
Sorry?
What was the conclusion?
There wasn't one really. It just kind of petered
So it
out.
was a wasted roundtable.
Like all great philosophical discussions, there was no answer.
I think in real life I'm Daffy Duck, you know, this sort of like grumpy, can never get what I want. So I'd love to have been Bugs Bunny for it. Yeah.
So we're wrapping up, and thank you all so much for an enjoyable conversation.
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.